She looked me dead in the eyes and said, "People like you should know your place." Those 8 words burned themselves into my brain, and as the room laughed, I made a promise to take hers. My name is Brooklyn Hayes, and for 2 years, I was invisible. I fetched coffee, took notes, stayed late, and got no credit. Amanda Sterling, my boss, made sure I knew I was nothing. She called me the help in front of investors. Once, she even said, "If ambition had a face, it sure wouldn't look like yours." But what she didn't know was that I was listening. Every cruel word, every illegal deal, every slip-up. And while she climbed higher by stepping on others, I was quietly building the case that would collapse her empire. The day I handed her downfall to the board, I didn't say a word. I just watched her face crumble, then sat in her chair. They called me the coffee girl. No one cared that I graduated magna cum laude from NYU. No one asked why I was working 12-hour days. To them, I was just the quiet assistant with flat shoes and a notepad. I blended in, made no waves, smiled too much. I knew all their birthdays, all their favorite drinks, all their dirty secrets. They knew nothing about me. My name is Brooklyn Hayes, and back then, I was invisible. Amanda Sterling. On the other hand, she was unforgettable. She walked into rooms like she owned the air inside them. Her heels announced her before her mouth ever did. She was ruthless, powerful, and terrifyingly good at what she did. She was also my boss, and she made sure I remembered that every single day. She'd send me to get her oat milk latte at 7 a.m., then scold me at 7:10 if it was lukewarm. She never remembered my name in meetings. Once, when I corrected a calendar mistake, she looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Sweetheart, know your place." The room went silent, then someone chuckled. Amanda didn't laugh, she just moved on, like my dignity didn't matter. But I didn't forget. I went home that night and replayed it over and over. Know your place. I wrote it down, taped it to my wall, let it fester. She thought I'd cry, that I'd shrink smaller, be more obedient. But what she didn't see was what I did with the pain. I turned it into a plan. For the next 2 years, I became a ghost with eyes wide open. I learned every detail of her job. I listened on every call. I copied every contract, every calendar invite, every confidential file she left open. I memorized the names she dropped. The shell companies, the slush funds, the silent investors. She once joked, "Brooklyn knows everything, but thankfully, she knows her place." That was her mistake, because I did know everything, and I was counting days. You see, Amanda had enemies, quiet ones, the kind who didn't speak up until the right moment. I knew because I watched, because no one watches the assistant. I became friends with the janitors, with the IT guy, with the ex-CFO she ran off in a board vote. I pieced together her kingdom and every crack in its foundation. And I waited. I waited until the moment came when her voice would no longer echo through the halls. The moment she'd finally hear mine, and in the silence of her fall, I'd be ready. Not as the coffee girl, but as her replacement. That was the beginning of my rise, and the end of her illusion. Because when someone tells you to know your place, you learn it, and then you take theirs, Amanda once said. Ambition is for the born elite. The rest are just employees. I smiled when she said it, smiled like I always did. But in that moment, a fire lit beneath my ribs. Because I wasn't just an employee. I was a vault. Every insult, every slip-up, every whispered secret, I kept them all locked away. And I was ready to turn the key. The first thing I did was build a map, not a literal one, but a mental blueprint of her power, where her money came from, who she owed, who feared her, who pretended to like her because they had to. Amanda wasn't a lone wolf, she was a spider. Her web stretched across departments, cities, accounts. Every strand looked perfect, until you traced where it connected. I traced them all. She had a fake consulting firm, Wendell Strategic, that funneled funds to a partner she was secretly dating. A luxury condo in Miami paid through offshore accounts. Bonuses inflated through internal tech loopholes. On paper, she was clean. In reality, she was bleeding the company dry. I had proof. I just needed to learn how to use it. So I went hunting for knowledge. After work, I'd go home, make black coffee, and open financial law books. I watched YouTube lectures at 2 a.m., took online certifications under a fake name. I studied board protocol, HR policy, whistleblower protection. During the day, I played my role, the quiet helper, the forgettable shadow. But every time Amanda barked my name, every time she rolled her eyes or called me kiddo in front of clients, I tightened the net. I met with one of her ex-lieutenants, Don Miller, a former VP she forced out when he questioned a deal. He was bitter, angry, but when I showed him what I had, his hands trembled. "You're either the bravest woman in New York or the craziest," he said. "Maybe both," I replied. Don connected me with people compliance officers, journalists, analysts. They didn't want headlines. They wanted justice. I didn't care about glory. I wanted her gone. But to do that, I had to get close, closer than ever. Amanda was planning a merger, a $300 million acquisition that would elevate her from executive to legend. She had skeletons in the closet. I had the master key. One night, she left early after a PR gala. I stayed behind. Her office wasn't locked. Her laptop was asleep. Password QueenB01. Of course, I copied everything: internal emails, balance sheets, internal audits. She never suspected a thing, because why would she? Brooklyn didn't matter. 2 weeks later, I dropped a thumb drive into a plain envelope, no return address, sent it to the board's general counsel. Then I waited. I'd imagined this moment 100 times. The explosion, the chaos. But reality was quieter. A ripple, not a wave. Amanda started coming in late. Her tone sharpened. Rumors spread. A compliance review was underway. People whispered in corners. She snapped at the director of operations during a staff meeting, walked out of a budget review, and then one afternoon she looked at me. Really looked at me. "You've been awfully quiet lately, Brooklyn," she said. "That a good thing?" I shrugged. "Sometimes silence is strategy." She smirked, but behind her eyes I saw fear. Just for a second. I walked away before she could ask anything else. By now, I was meeting with 2 board members off record. They didn't know it was me who sent the drive. They were trying to triangulate who it was. I played dumb. When I spoke, it was with measured precision. Never too much. Just enough to stay useful. I made myself the only person Amanda still trusted. Because when a queen's castle burns, she clings to the closest hand. And I was holding the match. I knew her days were numbered. The question was, how would she fall? Quietly or on fire? Either way, I'd be there. Not as her assistant, but as the one who learned, waited, and prepared. Every empire falls, but it takes a ghost to bring it down from the inside. But patience wasn't the only weapon I had. I started sitting in on meetings she used to skip. Internal strategy briefings, legal updates, tech compliance reviews. Everywhere Amanda left a gap, I filled it. Not loudly, not aggressively. I just appeared. Helpful, curious, prepared. One day, the CFO forgot the Q3 analytics packet before a finance call. I had it printed, annotated, on his desk in under a minute. He looked at me like I wasn't an assistant, but a backup generator. And just like that, people began to ask for me, not Amanda. "Can Brooklyn sit in on this, loop Brooklyn into that chain? Brooklyn, can you clarify what Amanda meant here?" She noticed. Her smiles grew thinner. Her eyes lingered too long. She started calling me by my full name, like it would re-establish power. It didn't. One night, I stayed late. The cleaning crew had just arrived. My desk was spotless, but Amanda's office door was cracked open. Curious, I walked in. Her desk was a mess, files scattered, sticky notes stuck to screens, lipstick-stained coffee cup trembling on the edge. On her chair lay a legal envelope, confidential. I didn't touch it. I didn't have to, because in her chaos, I saw it the downfall had begun. Not with a bang, but with disarray, disorder, a queen whose grip was loosening. And I was calm. The next morning, Amanda didn't show up to the executive huddle. The COO led the meeting. She didn't apologize for Amanda's absence. She looked straight at me and asked, "Brooklyn, can you give us the update on the Q4 prep?" Without missing a beat, I opened my folder and began. My voice didn't tremble. My words didn't falter. It was the first time I spoke in that room, and they listened. Afterward, the COO nodded slowly. Thank you, that was efficient. No one looked surprised. Amanda was slipping, and I was stepping into the light. That weekend, I sat in my apartment in Brooklyn Heights. I poured myself a glass of red wine and stared at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Amanda was probably screaming into a phone, trying to plug the leaks, but she didn't know that the biggest hole in her ship was sitting 2 floors below her for the last 2 years. Me, she once said ambition wasn't for people like me, that I should know my place. Well, I did, and I was just getting started. The board was preparing an emergency audit. Legal was circling like vultures. Her allies were vanishing, and my influence, it was expanding. I didn't need revenge to be loud. It just needed to be permanent. The walls of Sterling and Vale felt different that Monday morning. Lighter, like they'd exhaled. Amanda didn't show up for the executive briefing. She wasn't on the call. No terse emails, no hallway stares, just absence. The office didn't collapse. It carried on, but with murmurs. Like the calm before a storm, I moved through the building like a current no one noticed yet powered everything. The merger Amanda had orchestrated was hanging by threads. I had all the original pitch decks, the investor memos, the financial projections, and I knew which numbers were fake, inflated, fabricated to make her shine. The board didn't know the half of it, but they were about to. 3 days later, I received a calendar invite unmarked, private, from the General Counsel. Room 604, Thursday, 9:00 a.m. No subject, no agenda. I knew exactly what it meant. I wore gray, neutral, invisible, yet deliberate. When I entered the room, 4 people were already seated: General Counsel, COO, Head of Audit, and a board member I'd only seen from afar. They didn't waste time. We believe Amanda has engaged in conduct that puts the firm at significant risk, General Counsel began. And we believe you can help us understand how deep it goes. I didn't blink. I opened my folder. Inside was a timeline, 2 years of data, documented violations, hidden payments, shady deals, and one damning email, the one where Amanda told a partner to, quote, run it through Wendell, scrub the names, and make sure legal stays out. I laid it in front of them, watched the color drain from their faces. How did you get all this? One asked. I looked him square in the eye. She trained me. That was the moment everything changed. They didn't just see me as the whistleblower anymore. They saw me as the contingency plan. By noon, Amanda's key cards were deactivated. By 5, an internal memo went out. Miss Sterling is taking an indefinite leave of absence. Everyone knew what that meant. They just didn't say it. Her office stayed locked. Her name remained on the door. But inside, a silent war had ended. And I had won. That weekend, I took a train to Connecticut to visit my mother. She didn't know anything about the corporate battlefield I lived in. But when she saw me step through the door, her first words were, "You're standing taller?" I smiled. Feels like I finally came home with both feet. We didn't talk much about work, but at night, as I stared at the ceiling, I realized I wasn't done. Winning wasn't enough. I wanted transformation. Sterling and Vale was still flawed. Its foundation still cracked from years of Amanda's reign. If I truly wanted to change the culture, I had to move from shadow to spotlight. The opportunity came faster than I expected. A week later, I received another meeting invite, this time from the full board. Their faces were serious, but not hostile. "We want stability," one said, "and leadership that understands every corner of this company." They didn't say it outright, but the offer was clear. Interim Director of Strategy, reporting directly to the COO. No assistant title, no side office. A seat at the table. I took a breath. And I said yes. My first act wasn't to redecorate Amanda's office. It was to clear out the toxicity she left behind. I met with every department head. I asked questions no one ever asked. I listened. Some were skeptical, some resentful, but most were relieved. The silence Amanda demanded was gone. And in its place, dialogue. Real conversation. One afternoon, I walked past the glass walls of what used to be her conference room. Inside, people were laughing, sharing ideas. I caught my reflection in the glass. I didn't look like her. I didn't dress like her. I didn't rule like her. But I was standing where she stood. Only I didn't climb by breaking others. I rose by remembering everything they thought I'd forget. Every time she told me I wasn't enough. Every time she said I was lucky to even be in the room. Every file, every word, every smile I faked while sharpening my mind. This wasn't just revenge. It was a reclamation. Of power, of self-worth, of space. I didn't just take her spot. I redefined what the spot meant. And I wasn't done yet. Because power is not about shouting loudest. It's about outlasting those who thought you'd never rise. And I planned to rise higher than she ever imagined. The following Monday, I sat in Amanda's old chair for the first time. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility. That chair had been used to belittle, to manipulate, to intimidate. Now, it would serve a different purpose. I brought in no decorators, no press photos, no ego. Just a whiteboard, a calendar, and an open-door policy. The first week was a whirlwind. Everyone had questions. What's next? Who's leading the merger? Is she coming back? I answered what I could, honestly, confidently, but I made one thing clear. We're not operating under Amanda's rulebook anymore. Some didn't believe me, others didn't want to, but the majority, they leaned in. I started reorganizing the merger team, replaced her cronies with actual talent, people who had been overlooked, people like me. One of them, Jada from legal, approached me after a long strategy meeting. "You know," she said, "I used to dread walking into this room." I looked around. Same walls, same windows. But something had shifted. "Not anymore," she added. Then she smiled. That night, I stayed late, alone. I opened Amanda's old drawer. It still held remnants of her rain half-used lipsticks, outdated business cards, a gold pen engraved with her initials. I left it all untouched. Let history gather dust. Instead, I opened my laptop and began building a mentorship program, one that identified assistants, interns, and junior analysts across the firm. The quiet ones, the smart ones, the ones no one saw. Because if anyone knew the value of those in the shadows, it was me. Days turned into weeks. Performance improved, culture shifted. We started getting praise in the press not because of spin, but because of results. And then came the inevitable. Amanda tried to come back, not physically. She sent a letter through legal channels stating she wanted to resume a consulting role in strategic direction. The board met to discuss. They were divided. She still had influence, connections, a legacy, even if it was stained. They asked me for input. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I handed them a single-page memo titled "What We've Built Without Her." It listed new client growth, improved retention, internal promotions, whistleblower confidence, 0 ethics violations. Then I said one sentence. "You don't let the virus back in after the fever breaks." The room went silent. A vote was taken. Amanda Sterling would not return to Sterling and Vale in any capacity. I walked out of that boardroom not as the girl who took notes, but as the woman who rewrote the narrative. For myself, for the next Brooklyn, for the dozens like me still learning in silence. They'll never tell us we don't belong again, because we don't just take seats at the table. We build new ones. And when they say know your place, we do. Right at the top. It wasn't until the headlines hit that I realized just how far I'd come. Amanda Sterling, former CEO of Sterling and Vale, under federal investigation. The story broke on a Monday. By Tuesday, our phones didn't stop ringing. Clients, investors, the press, everyone wanted answers. But the best part? We had them, because the truth had always been buried just beneath Amanda's perfection. And now, unearthed. It was louder than any PR campaign she'd ever bought. I sat in the strategy room reviewing a stack of damage control proposals. Everyone was tense except me, because I wasn't covering up a scandal. I had already cleaned the mess, quietly, strategically. What they feared would be our downfall became proof of our rebirth. Amanda had built a house of cards. I had rebuilt the foundation. And now, with the spotlight back on the company, ironically thanks to her disgrace, I had the leverage to finish what I started. The COO called me into her office that afternoon. She shut the door, folded her arms, and said, "They want you at the helm." I blinked. "What?" "The board. After the press dies down, they're offering you the seat permanently. Chief Strategy Officer, if you want it." There it was. The chair. Not Amanda's shadow. not her assistant, not her cleanup crew. Me? I looked out her window, into the sprawl of Manhattan where dreams come to die or be reborn. I thought of all the nights I stayed late, unnoticed, all the times she called me just a girl with a clipboard. I'd weaponized silence. Now I would wield authority, and I wouldn't rule like Amanda did. I'd lead. That evening, I walked back into my apartment, same creaky floorboards, same chipped mirror by the door. But I was different. I pulled out a box from under my bed. Inside was every insult I'd collected like armor, the sticky note that said, "Know your place." The review where she called me decorative but diligent. I burned them, piece by piece, watched the smoke rise like old ghosts being exorcised. Amanda's legacy was over. Mine had just begun. The next quarter, under my leadership, we landed 2 new Fortune 500 accounts. Internal promotions doubled. We restructured toxic teams. The old regime fell like rotting scaffolding. And in its place, real growth. At an industry conference in Chicago, a journalist asked me on stage, "How did you transition from assistant to executive?" I looked at the crowd, mostly men, mostly older. Some looked curious, others skeptical. I smiled. I stopped asking for permission. The room went quiet, then applause. Loud, sustained. It echoed somewhere deep in my chest. Weeks later, I found myself walking the halls alone, late one night. The office was silent, empty. I passed by Amanda's old portrait, the one she had commissioned herself. I paused. Then I turned and walked to the archive room, pulled the key from my pocket. Inside, files going back decades, reports, photos, notes. I added something new. A folder titled The Quiet Rebellion. Inside my plans, my documentation, the arc from silence to power. For the next Brooklyn, for the ones still fetching coffee while listening with sharp minds and sharper hearts. So they'd know there's a way out, a way up, even if it starts with nothing but grit and memory. And one day, when someone tells them to know their place, they'll know it's a signal, not to shrink, but to strike. The final chapter of Amanda's story wasn't hers to write. It was mine. And in that silence she once demanded, I built a revolution. One whisper at a time. And now, they call me Chief. But I still remember every syllable she spat like poison. And I turned it into fuel. That's the thing about women like me. We don't just survive. We study, we wait, we build, and when the world finally gives us the mic, we burn the script they wrote for us and write our own. In fire, the fire didn't stop at Amanda. It lit a path through every dusty corner of the company where injustice had grown like mold. We revisited every policy, every promotion pipeline, every mentorship program that had been a smokescreen for favoritism. We tore them down and built real ones. I started personally interviewing junior staff. Not just resumes, but stories. I listened for the invisible grit, the quiet fire I once carried alone. One intern, Diego, told me how he worked 2 jobs and still finished top of his class. He reminded me of me. I didn't just hire him, I mentored him. 3 months later, he was leading a client presentation. Afterwards, he said to me, I didn't think people like us ever got here. I said, neither did they. And we laughed, not in bitterness, but in triumph. Because the system hadn't changed on its own. We forced it to. I kept a list taped inside my drawer, not of enemies. Of names, the ones who helped quietly, the ones who warned me, lifted me, or simply didn't stop me. Revenge wasn't just personal, it was structural. At our next annual meeting, I stood at the podium. Rows of faces, some familiar, some skeptical. I looked around and said, 2 years ago, I was invisible in this building. Now I'm not here to be seen. I'm here to make sure no one else gets overlooked. It wasn't rehearsed. It was truth. And it landed because when power speaks softly but with fire, it burns cleaner. That night, I walked past Amanda's portrait again. This time, it was gone. Replaced by a wall of employee milestones, photos of promotions, awards, smiles. Proof that the culture had changed, that power had changed hands, and that sometimes the assistant doesn't just take the throne. She rewrites the crown's purpose, not for revenge anymore, but for everyone who deserved a shot and never got one. Until now, and that's what they'll remember. Not the scandal, not Amanda, but the storm that followed, and the woman who didn't just survive it, she became it. Weeks later, I was invited to deliver a keynote at a women's leadership summit in D.C. Backstage, someone handed me the program. My name, Brooklyn Hayes, was printed above the phrase, "From assistant to architect, the quiet rise." I stared at it for a second, because that wasn't a title, that was a legacy. I walked on stage to the sound of applause, not thunderous, not roaring, but steady, earned. I looked into the crowd, rows and rows of women, some young, some graying, all carrying stories. And I said, I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to smile, nod, and fade into the background. But I didn't, because someone told me to know my place, and I did. I just never told them that place was at the top. The crowd rose, and in that moment I felt it. Full circle. This wasn't Amanda's company anymore. This was my era, not ruled by fear, but by force of vision, the kind that starts in silence and ends in fire. I used to wonder what victory would feel like. Would it come with fireworks, trumpets, a glass ceiling cracking in real time? Turns out, it feels like walking into a boardroom and watching every head turn. Not because you're late, but because now you lead. It's in the way they lean in when you speak, how they pause before interrupting, how they quote you in emails, cite you in reports, echo your words in meetings. And it hits you. You're no longer fighting to be heard. You are the voice in the room. Months passed since Amanda's name vanished from the company directory. Sterling and Vale evolved. Lighter, sharper, faster. Clients stayed, partners invested, new talent flooded in. We weren't rebuilding from ruin. We were reimagining from the ashes. And I was no longer the assistant behind the queen. I had become the architect of the next dynasty. But here's the twist no one expects. Success isn't the loudest moment. It's the quiet one. Like the day I walked into the break room and saw 2 interns, one Latina, one South Asian, rehearsing a pitch like their lives depended on it. I smiled and said, "You're going to crush it." Their eyes lit up, because encouragement from the top, that was new. Revolution doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, "I see you," and that's enough to ignite someone's future. But the world outside hadn't forgotten Amanda. Neither had I. She resurfaced. Podcast interviews, op-eds, claims of sabotage, victimhood, reinvention. She painted herself as a misunderstood pioneer, toppled by jealousy. She never once said my name, but I lived rent-free in her every word. A reporter reached out for comment. I declined, because while she chased legacy, I was building one. Mine didn't need headlines. It lived in policy changes, in quarterly numbers, in the culture we had reshaped with sweat, tears, and truth. And yet, I couldn't pretend the past didn't matter. So I wrote something, not for the press, but for the next girl, the one who was just handed coffee orders by someone who forgot her name. It was called The Silence Playbook, a guide, a story, a battle plan. 1 part strategy, 1 part memoir, 1 part warning, because some wars are won with words, and some are won when no one sees you coming. It went viral, not because it was loud, but because it was real. Messages poured in, assistants, junior staff, single moms, immigrants, dreamers. They all said the same thing. I thought I was alone. Thank you for showing me I'm not. I cried, quietly, joyfully, because that was the real victory. Not a chair, not a title, but becoming the person I needed when I had nothing but fire in my chest and nowhere to put it. I was invited to Harvard Business School to speak. Before I walked in, I looked down at my hands. The same ones that once typed Amanda's emails, took notes on her tantrums, picked up her dry cleaning. Now they were holding my own lecture notes. The full circle made me dizzy, but I stood tall. Leadership, I told the class, is not about being the loudest. It's about remembering what silence costs and refusing to make others pay it. They stood when I finished. I never thought applause could sound like healing. Later that night, I sat on my balcony overlooking the East River. Lights shimmered across the water. I thought of Amanda, not with hatred, not even with pity. Just clarity. She had built a fortress out of fear. I had built a kingdom out of resilience. That's the difference. Her empire collapsed when the truth came. Mine rose because I never stopped carrying it. And someday, when I'm no longer here, someone else will carry it further. Because real power doesn't die with one name. It lives on in every person we lift. Every voice we validate. Every table we build for those still outside the room. That's my place now. not beside the powerful, but among those who were told they never could be, and proving again and again that they always were. They just needed a moment, a match, a whisper, a war cry disguised as a kind smile. That's the revolution, and it started when someone told me to know my place. Now the world knows it too, and it's never going back. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of our global staff on live stream. It was our annual summit, pre-Amanda. It was all buzzwords and champagne. Now, it was substance. I walked on stage, simple black dress, no flash, just fire. The room quieted. Let me start with this, I said. If you've ever been underestimated, overworked, or overlooked, you belong here. Applause started, soft, then rolled into a standing ovation, because they knew I meant it, and I wasn't done. I unveiled our new leadership development initiative, one designed specifically for non-traditional candidates, people who had never been tapped on the shoulder, people who never got invited to the table. It was called the RISE program, and on its homepage, one quote, "Know your place, build your own." My inbox exploded. We received over 2,000 applications in 48 hours. Stories from janitors, single parents, refugees, college dropouts, all hungry, all brilliant, all ignored. Not anymore. I spent nights reading their stories. I cried more times than I'll admit, because every one of them could have been me. The next week, I got an anonymous envelope. Inside one of Amanda's old business cards. Nothing else. I recognized the handwriting on the back. One sentence, you won. No name, no signature, but I knew it was her. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like closure. And I tucked it away not as a trophy, but a reminder that some endings don't need applause. Just peace. Months later, Forbes named me in their Women to Watch issue. I barely looked at the article. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew what really mattered. In the lobby of our HQ, we hung a new mural, not of executives, not of founders, but of hands, reaching down, lifting up. No names, just action. Because legacies aren't built from titles, they're built from impact. And mine started in silence and ended in every voice I helped rise. So if you're listening to this, and you're still in the shadows, still waiting, still underestimated, let them think you're harmless. Let them think you're quiet. Then smile and take everything they said you couldn't have, because your place is wherever you decide to build it. And trust me, they'll feel it when you arrive.